if the Long Walk book is a Richard Bachman mode of storytelling, I feel like the filmmakers here almost sort of deployed Stephen King as a mode of storytelling. While it is so bleak, there is still that hopeful thread that feels like in keeping with a Stephen King story. And I would applaud them for staying true to Stephen King and that original source material, Bachman specifically, and then somehow finding a way to change it and turn it into something that I recognize as like almost more of a Stephen King story. Welcome, friends, to episode 362 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And this week we discuss Francis Lawrence's 2025 film, The Long Walk. All right, we're back. We had a brief pause, and we will have a not-so-brief pause coming up here in our coverage, but we're going to tell you all about that. This week we are talking about The Long Walk, the film. We were both really excited to see this. Stephen King is a favorite of the podcast. Definitely check out 2 weeks ago, we released our Bachman book, Stephen King.
Richard Bachman discussion.
Book coverage.
All into the story behind the name. So if you're curious about that and why he chose that pen name and the history behind it, definitely check out that previous week's episode. And that's going to inform a lot about this one too. But I wanted to start things off by announcing that we are now, James, I don't know if you realize this, we are now a podcast with two brothers-in-law who do a podcast together. Yep. We've been going for 8 years where that wasn't the case, going on 9. But now that is the case because James married my sister over the weekend. I was able to fly into Florida and join them for the ceremony, which was lovely. And I picked up some sort of bug, so that's why I might sound a little hoarse right now. But I'm powering through it. But excited to say we are now bound by law in some way.
Officially family now,
Officially
even though
family.
It already felt that way before, but yeah, it's legit now, and it was fun. I'm so glad everybody joined us, and best day of my life. It was awesome, and I am excited for our honeymoon, which is what we are going to be having a pause in our coverage for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I assume the podcast is going to feel really different now as our bond only grows. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know
Way
what
more
that
intense
means.
now.
But
It's more intimate.
It's more intimate now. We are going to be taking some time off while James is in Japan. This is going to be the longest stretch where we haven't released an episode, like a new episode, since 2017. Which is crazy to say. We went through an entire pandemic where we kept up with it like pretty consistently. But he's doing this big trip. So what we're gonna do is I think 4 From the Vault releases. And we have a plan for doing some stuff that's gonna be Halloween related. Leading up to Halloween, we're gonna do our coverage of the documentary Room 237, in which we get into all the conspiracy theories about The Shining. That's a fun one. And then on the 30th, I think right around Halloween, we're going to be doing our Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which was a Kenneth Branagh film, which is just a wild movie. And I know we had a lot of fun talking about that, so it'll be cool to release that to the main feed. And then coming in November, we'll follow that up with a Jumanji. The 2017 movie starring The Rock and all that, so quite different, but we'll be releasing that to the main feed, and then finishing up with our mini interviews we did with a bunch of former guests at Worldcon, and we'll release that I think like the second week of November, and then soon after that we'll be back and we'll be coming with a new project, but for now it's going to be a bit of a different setup for us and a different release schedule, but hopefully you can all bear with us and understand that this is kind of a unique circumstance.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and I promise we'll get back to our regularly scheduled coverages, and those bonus episodes are fun too. Like, don't get me wrong. Yeah. I think for those who haven't heard them, it'll definitely feel like a new release still. So hopefully that helps out with that. But yeah, we're talking The Long Walk now.
That's right.
The film. And first I want to talk about like theater going experiences, because I love getting to talk about the fact that we are still able to go see movies in theaters as much as some people don't want to leave their homes. It's awesome. It's a good experience. And this is a sort of communal film that I had a lot of fun with. Went with some people I knew. And I feel like, you go through something like that in a theater. Now, we didn't go to the screenings where people were on treadmills, which is a cool thing that is for the marketing.
Yeah, that was a fun thing they did. I heard about that. It's like you got to this special screening, you had to be on a treadmill, and then if you stopped walking, you had to leave the movie theater. You couldn't finish the movie. Which is a fun little game to play there.
Yeah, I considered last week, or I guess last episode, I talked about how like I have a treadmill. I was considering doing it during this episode as a fun kind of thing, but I just felt like that it would affect the sound too much. So now I'm here just resting after the wedding. So
yeah, instead you get to hear my raspy tones.
Yeah.
Without any walking in the background.
Yeah, and I will say I had a fun kind of off the cuff experience with my theater going experience, and that was that so I took like a Lyft or an Uber over to the movie theater, and then I got out of the film and I was just like struck with this intense want to walk. So I started walking from the theater. Granted, it was like 7 or 8 miles home. So like I started walking and I was like, I'm just going to see what happens here. And, the wedding was coming up and I didn't have a ton of time, but I just like, for whatever reason, started walking.
This is just you on your own at that point?
Yeah. I had broken off with the other people and I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to walk a little bit. Like we had gotten some food and then I was like, I'm just going to walk for a minute.
This is in Florida, so I assume it's hot.
It wasn't so bad. No, it was kind of nice actually. Okay, yeah. But
I will say Florida's not known for being very pedestrian friendly.
My area is, there's certain areas that are for sure, but yeah, I agree. It's not the state itself, I wouldn't say is, but
yeah, right.
There are little pockets, and it was fine. I was walking and walked through like a neighborhood for a little bit, and like
Did you
eventually
make sure you stayed above 3 miles per hour the whole
That's
time?
something that was fun that I was kind of pushing myself, because it was really cool because one, I was processing the film. It was processing the food that I just ate, and just like, I don't know, having a fun game with myself and being like, you can decide, you have free will, you can decide to do anything you want. So I just started walking, and I only walked like maybe a little over a mile, almost 2 miles, and then called my Uber or Lyft to come pick me up and take me the rest of the way.
You got tired, dude. You bought your ticket.
I didn't have the time really, more than anything, but yeah, I bought my ticket for sure. And I don't know, it was fun. It was like the right thing to do after that movie.
Get you in the headspace. I like that. That's cool, man. Yeah, I went and saw it at the Laurelhurst Theater, which is like a throwback older theater here in Portland, because we saw it like a little bit after its initial run, so it wasn't everywhere. It wasn't playing everywhere. So a little kind of smaller side room. Saw it with a couple of friends who'd never read the book, so I got to talk with them after the fact and kind of get their reactions to it. They had some concept of what it was. They'd seen the trailer, but yeah, they hadn't read the book, so they didn't have that context, and it was fun to hear that and kind of give some of my perspective on it, having read the book. But yeah, let's talk about that now. Kind of just general reactions. I thought the movie was good. I thought that it was sadder than I maybe anticipated, although I probably should have anticipated it to being quite sad. I mean, the book is pretty bleak and depressing too, but I don't know. It's just a little different when you see it on screen. You get kind of attached to these actors, and I think that was kind of the impression I got from the folks I went with who hadn't read the book, is they were like, yeah, this was a sad, kind of depressing movie to watch. I think they had a good time, but it was one of those where it's like, I don't think I ever want to see that again, because it was a tough watch.
I mean, yeah, I get that totally. It's I think it's meant to evoke that in its audience. I like you said, the performances and these actors that portrayed these characters like really played up on a lot of the elements that are there in the book, like the camaraderie elements and the I don't know, there's like a joy, and this is something I was thinking about recently, having just had a wedding and the times that we're going through, and like how like joy sometimes can be almost like a defiant act, and I think that's what these characters are going through often, and like in this like oppressive sort of game that they found themselves in, they are, like you said last episode, just like kind of making the best of it, of the time that they have together.
Definitely, that was like the message too.
Yeah,
we got a few times from some characters kind of saying as much.
Yeah, and I think defiance and seeing all of them, bond in that way, and the Three Musketeers, all for one, one for all kind of thing, and like how that is embodying a certain outlook on all this bleakness for sure.
I think it's a little bit similar to that line where it's like, oh, I thought I always thought that like I'd look back and the guns would shoot out the little flag with the word bang on it. And I don't know if that's some moviegoers maybe saw the trailer and were like, oh, this is a movie about people having to walk, and if they go below a certain speed, they die. I'll go check this out. But damn, if you don't end up watching a lot of people die.
You do, yeah.
So a lot of people. Which, by the way, one of the changes they did make. We're gonna hold spoilers, but this isn't really a spoiler. In the book, there's 100 walkers, and in the movie, there's 50, one from each state. So there's actually less death in the movie. Although a lot of the death that occurs in the book is kind of like off page, or like you just hear about gunshots and stuff. You don't see it directly. Whereas we end up seeing a lot of it here, although maybe not all of it too. But I mean, you have a limited run time, so you can't show every single death.
And even in the book, we heard Garrity talk about like gunshots through the night and that kind of stuff. So like you're not seeing everything, but that's like very oppressive. The film has like I said, there's like a joyfulness to it. There's like, while I think it is incredibly depressing and like the messaging there I think is powerful, it's like it does have a good amount of humor that I think came through, and like I said, like you could really feel the camaraderie that was there. And from what I understand, like Francis Lawrence and Co and the other creatives involved really wanted to lean into like that brutality, because Francis Lawrence is a filmmaker that we've covered a few times now. Did you realize that?
I did not.
So Francis Lawrence.
I also have a bad memory, so that's
Francis Lawrence is maybe this might be the third time that we've covered him.
Really?
Almost fourth, and I'll explain why that is. So,
okay.
First one that we covered, I think, was I Am Legend, was Francis Lawrence. Then,
yeah, I remember that.
Water for Elephants was also Francis Lawrence.
Oh, yeah.
And now we're covering The Long Walk. But interestingly, he directed 4 of the 5, I believe, that are out Hunger Games films.
Oh, okay.
So similar kind of territory. That's something that I talked about.
Just not the first one.
Not the first one, which is the one we covered, but he did direct the rest of them. And it's interesting because, like, of course, that, like I said last episode, how it felt like this is like the prototype, or like the blueprint for that kind of story of like this game and like a society that's put this upon its people in certain ways, and like glorifies it, and seeing the director who went through and made a bunch of Hunger Games films make an R-rated, like maybe more mature look at it in more of a bleak, stripped down way, I thought was kind of interesting. And it's like, it seemed like the Lionsgate team and some of the people who were involved with creating the Hunger Games were like, well, this is the kind of a thing that's worked for us. Let's try it again with the Stephen King story that kind of fits the mold.
Yeah, that's really interesting, man. What a varied set of films there you've just talked about. Varying quality too, I would say, but yeah, this was a good one, I thought. I overall enjoyed it. I can't get into all the changes that were made because a lot of that's pretty spoilery, but overall, I felt like this movie pushed the bleakness of the story into a direction where it felt like it had a little bit more of a purpose, and by the end maybe gave you a little bit more closure. We'll talk about what that looks like, but so if that sounds appealing to you, if that sounds like something you would maybe want out of this story, then that would be a reason to see this version, especially if you're like someone who's only read the book. If you want the more bleak version, I think the book is where you're at for that, and we can weigh in at the end on whether or not we prefer the book or the movie. My spoiler for that is just that it's very close for me, so I'm still kind of weighing it. I might make my decision in the moment, but yeah, I think this is quite a good movie. I really liked the book last week, so they're neck and neck for me right now.
Cool. Yeah, I'm excited to dig more into this, and yeah, I think if the premise sounds interesting to you, just know that like I went into even the Richard Bachman Stephen King story thinking, sounds like a really simple premise, but I knew Stephen King more than likely was gonna do a lot of good character work that was going to get us invested and build out this world. And even for a Stephen King story, although that was Richard Bachman technically, it was there was a lot left to the imagination, or a lot left on the peripheral, which was just kind of the world that was existing, and I kind of appreciated the story for that. I think that the film follows suit in doing a lot of that. It's kind of really just like,
it doesn't
not
explain everything too much.
Yeah, not worrying about kind of why we're here or what's going on in the larger system, but really honing in on like what these boys and men are going through, and like some of the traumatic reasons they may or may not be doing it, and what it says about humanity in a lot of ways.
What were the reactions of the people you went to the movie with? Were you able to talk with them a little bit after?
Yeah, they liked it. They liked it.
Had they read the book, or were they movie only people?
Had movie only. Yep.
Yeah, and they enjoyed it overall?
They did. Yeah, they seemed to be surprised that it was kind of touted so much as like a Stephen King story, because it just doesn't. I don't know. Of course, he's varied as an artist, but I think you do Stephen King, you think certain things.
I think a lot of people don't realize just how varied he is, right? Like, don't realize Shawshank Redemption is Stephen King. Like, that kind of
Green
thing,
Mile,
right?
all that kind of stuff.
Cool. All right, man. I think let's get into background and stuff, and then we'll open up for spoilers here, so we can discuss all the changes and that we were able to catch, and the implications to the message, which I think is definitely interesting to unpack.
Definitely. So Francis Lawrence, I talked about him a little bit, some of his work. Another couple ones that we should note, and we've talked about him previously, so we won't go super deep into him. You can check out some of those other I Am Legend, Water for Elephants. We talked about him before. He started out as a director of music videos and commercials. He worked on things such as music videos for Rihanna, Green Day, Britney Spears, Black Eyed Peas, Jay-Z, Avril Lavigne, Aerosmith, Janet Jackson, Jennifer Lopez, Lady Gaga, goes on and on and on. So
like everybody, man.
Very successful. Goo Goo Dolls, Gwen Stefani, Justin Timberlake, Shakira. Like, it's a massive list.
So everybody's probably seen a music video that this guy directed.
More than likely, because those are all, that was the heyday of music videos.
He's a massive artist, yeah.
And then commercials such as clients for like Coca-Cola, L'Oreal, Calvin Klein, Pepsi Cola, Maybelline, Kids Foot Locker, Bacardi, McDonald's, Gap, Bud Light, on and on and on. So very successful just in kind of the commercial space in that way. It's music videos obviously are like pretty creative, and so can commercials be. But then he eventually would move into directing feature films, narrative work. And Constantine, 2005, was the first film that he directed.
That's cool. That's a pretty fun movie. I need to see that again. I think I saw it in the theater when it came out, but I know a lot of people really liked that movie, and I remember liking it. Maybe one I'd like to watch again, especially this time of year. I think it'd be a good one for the Halloween season.
Sure, yeah. And like Keanu, obviously, like he's like, so like he's either gonna like knock it out of the park and be a crowd favorite, or the movie's gonna be weird and not work. But like Constantine is a fun movie, and there's some scenes that stand out to me in that film. And when it came out, and I believe they're working on a sequel now with Keanu coming back.
I've heard that. Yeah, it's been rumored for a while. I'm wondering to see if it's like, I'm waiting for an official trailer or something before I believe it, because
I am in this period with Keanu now where I'm just like, I mean, just do whatever you want, man. I'm gonna go check it out. I'm gonna check it out. I love him. So that was cool. That was his first film, and then like I said, I Am Legend, Water for Elephants, then Catching Fire, Mockingjay Part 1 and 2, and then he directed the Jennifer Lawrence film Red Sparrow.
Okay, I never saw that, but I know it wasn't super well received.
Yeah.
I think it's based on a book, maybe?
Oh,
that one might be
interesting.
based on a book, yeah.
Cool. And then the 2022 film Slumberland, 2023 Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is a Hunger Games film.
That's that recent one. Okay, so he did the new one, too.
Yep. And then The Long Walk, and it says in 26 he's directing another Hunger Games film called Sunrise on the Reapings, which is like a new, very
took a break from Hunger Games to do The Long Walk. That's interesting.
Yeah. He's found his niche, I think. He's found something that works for him. But yeah, so that's a lot of his work there. Seems to be very successful.
Yeah. What did you think of the kind of the filmmaking overall, like the look of this movie and the
Yeah, I actually thought that I would just say in general, the cinematography was really solid. I thought that it did a good job of like delivering the bleak look. A lot of these like longer takes of like them trudging along down these roads, country roads and everything. I think a lot of these wide shots were very effective for me. I like the look of it, I like the color palette. I thought that, the editing was very sharp. Overall, I just think it was a really well made film. It wasn't like, I don't know, the most beautiful film I've ever seen, it felt like maybe in some ways it was a little safe, but it did stay internally consistent as far as like the look, the feel. It was all in service of the story, so it was all working for me. And I thought that like a lot of the production design with like the tanks and the soldiers, and it felt very oppressive, and like obviously like the gore and the lengths that they went to in some cases for like some gross out moments. Like I thought that it was all very effective, so I have no complaints.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, good, if not maybe quite going into great, as far as just like stylistically. Like one of the scenes that stands out most to me was a moment where I think it's Garrity kind of looks back towards camera and keeps walking, and then behind, out of focus, we see one of the boys get executed. And so, like, our attention is drawn to what's happening behind him, but because it's out of focus, we kind of get the sense of, like, he's trying not to look at it. And so I thought that was a cool way to sort of imply that. It still shows it to us, so we still know it's happening back there, but it's out of focus, so we don't see the details. So the couple moments like that. But, yeah, I mean, I was a little underwhelmed by like some of the night scenes. Like I thought had an opportunity to look a little more interesting than they ended up looking.
Well, to get kind of like surreal, and like really push that.
Yeah, especially because like that's how the book was written, right? Like those were really dreamlike moments. And then like towards the end, there's some moments where I felt like we could have maybe gone a little more surreal or a little weirder. But yeah, it kind of played it safer. But overall, I would still say good, and especially from like the list of movies I heard you list there, and what we've covered with him, I would say this is like upper echelon. Seems to be someone who is coming to their own as a director, and I'm enjoying it for sure.
Well, and this is what I'll say too. A director is definitely their vision is being deployed, and they're obviously like the creative force behind it. But like what a director often does too is work with actors very closely, and I thought that the performances were standout in this film.
Definitely.
Like I think that was the thing that like if I was going to give them credit for anything here is that you got excellent performances out of the young men. A lot of these people are going to be stars, I think, in the future. We're looking at a cast of people who are all going to take off and continue to be very successful for a very long time. Cooper Hoffman, I thought was excellent. Obviously, Philip Seymour Hoffman's son.
Is that our main actor? Oh yeah,
he is. Yeah.
I didn't know he was Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah, and Philip Seymour Hoffman was one of my favorite actors of his generation. I just absolutely loved him.
Yeah, that guy was incredible.
Incredible. So cool to see. I mean, I've seen a couple other films that Cooper has done at this point, and I think he's really.
He didn't look familiar to me. Like I don't know that I've seen him in. Maybe I just.
He was in Licorice Pizza, Paul Thomas Anderson film that came out a couple years ago. Pretty controversial, but he was good in the film. And but specifically David Johnson.
Yeah, David Johnson. Killed it. He was in Alien, the new Alien movie.
Yeah.
What is it called? Alien Romulus. And I thought he was probably my favorite performance in that film.
For sure.
And he was really good in this one too. I thought he made a great McVrees, and their relationship was sort of the heart and soul of this movie.
Absolutely, the heartbeat of the film. And I was like, again, I think that these two are going to go on to do a lot of great things. I think a lot of the cast is. I also have heard them speak about their relationship because one thing to note with like the production of this film too is that like these people were actually walking during a lot of the filming of this. So I was reading reports that they were walking upwards of 15 miles per day for the production.
Wow, yeah.
They were actually going through this. A lot of what we were seeing. This is so cool too. Lawrence decided to film this chronologically. So as the film goes on, we're seeing the fatigue of the shoot in the actors, like physically, like as like sort of a method kind of thing that's happening to these people as they're going through it.
Interesting. But I mean, it was over many days, I assume. It was.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was over probably 2 months, but
so they're getting rest.
They are, but they're probably shooting 5 days a week, taking 2 days off, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
If you're walking,
it is cool to do it in that way, and I think that probably does help imply the sort of ongoing difficulty of this. That's really neat.
Psychologically, it's there.
Yeah,
physically,
that's cool.
15 miles a day is no joke. It's like for those people to be walking in. Like, you can't stunt double that kind of stuff because they're doing multiple takes and all that. And so they were like, yeah, no, it was legit. Some people were dealing with like some injuries and that kind of thing as they're doing all that walking.
Yeah, I did notice they changed it from and this isn't a spoiler, but in the book it's 4 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And here it's 3. I think 3 is a little more realistic from what I've heard. 3 is like a normal walking pace. I think that Stephen King wanted it to seem like this is kind of a fast walk just to like kind of add a little level of like difficulty, but I think realistically 3 is probably something that would be more doable. 4 would be, I think, quite a bit harder.
I saw some people talk about this. I think it was Lawrence and the creative team, or maybe it was the screenwriter, but they were talking about the change, and actually that was at the request of Stephen King because he felt like in hindsight like it's a little fast, and people they were saying like it's an awkward like sort of speed to be walking, because you're like in between walking and running or jogging.
Yeah,
at that point.
It's like power walking.
And so it's just like getting into that sort of speed would be kind of unrealistic, like you said. So that was a change that Stephen King kind of was pushing for as well.
Yeah, I like that. Which, by the way, that was one of the things I had heard, is that he was quite involved in this, and I don't know how true that is. Someone told me that, but like, did you see how involved King was?
Yeah, I did. So involved, I think, as like an expert to the material.
I think he had
like
an executive producer credit.
Yeah,
I remember at the end.
I think he was around giving input. The day-to-day shooting stuff was obviously Francis Lawrence, but like he specifically King said he thought that if they weren't going to go into the brutality and show the violence on screen, that they shouldn't make the film. He was like, my advice is really show this stuff, because it's supposed to be that deeply affecting, and I think that brutal. And so they I think they, to his wishes, stuck to that.
Yeah,
and,
they went
tried
for
to
it.
Tried to go for it. And so back to some of these actors, I just want to talk about David Johnson. Heartbeat of the film, the interaction with all the other Three Musketeers specifically, like Arthur Baker, who was played by Tut Nyot, I thought was excellent. I think he's going to be a huge star. Ben
Wang,
really
good. There's a couple of these characters that were kind of like combo characters, so they kind of combined a couple different characters in the book.
Ben Wang was Hank Olson, who was definitely a combined character, who specifically is kind of his background was a different character.
Yeah, it's like background, and then like some of their fates were changed a little bit. Like they might be get the fate of a different character who maybe was omitted in the movie.
Right. And then how could we not talk about Mark Hamill, because he's a legend.
Yeah, Mark Hamill, man,
screen, and
my honorary father.
He's just by all accounts the nicest, coolest,
I love
most level-headed person. I love the stuff that he talks about, out in the interviews that he has and everything like that. And like he was wary to take on this role because he's like against gun violence and everything. And
but that's like that ends up being kind of the thematic messaging behind the movie. Yeah. And he's playing the major, so he's the villain, but I feel like he's done this a couple times. Like, what was it on our Fall of the House of Usher coverage? He was a very interesting villainous character in that.
Not gun violence, but yeah, definitely
not gun violence, but just villain. But, like I feel like he's leaning into like playing these villains and these dark characters.
And the for a long time he was famous for being Luke Skywalker, and then obviously as far as voice acting is concerned, he was the Joker for a very long time. One of the best Jokers, I would say. So he had that streak in him as well. So I've always thought that was cool that he had that both sides to him like that, and we can definitely see that some of that being employed here. He does a great job of being like a total whatever authoritarian,
aloof asshole, authoritarian mouthpiece kind of character.
Yeah, it was cool too. I heard that like a lot of the actors were starstruck, but also didn't want to interact with him because he was the antagonist. So they didn't want to create a relationship off screen that would somehow impact that. So, I heard stories about like David Johnson and Cooper Hoffman, like literally did not talk to him for the entire production. And then as soon as they wrapped, like ran to his trailer, talked to him for hours. And like, they were like, that's awesome. Luke Skywalker. How could you know? And they were massive fans. Obviously he's like the sweetest guy from what they say.
That's so cool.
So very cool. That just a great cast and the way that they put this film together and kept the brutality like Stephen King wanted to. It sounds like he definitely signs off on this. And I think it makes, as far as I've seen critical reception, my own personal like viewpoint on it, this is it's kind of a unique King film, especially in today's massive blockbuster King territory. Like this is, I think it was like $20 million to make. Thankfully, it's made like 50 something million, so it's made back its money and it's doing.
I remember I
really
saw
well.
An early on report that it was like bombing or something, but
it was fine.
It sounds like that's not true.
I mean, like it's not blowing everybody away, but it I think it made a fair amount of money and it's a success and did well enough.
Yeah, this movie deserves it. It's a good movie.
I think so, yeah, and it's really fun to see like how it was playing with King's work, and I don't think it's really a spoiler to say. There's like some references to other Stephen King material that pops up here and there, which we can dig more into.
Yeah, some Easter eggs. I'm excited to hear about those.
Last thing to talk about before we get into the plot here is some of the background of how this film came to be. Okay. Originally in 1988, George A. Romero was considered to direct the film adaptation. Never came to fruition. By 2007, Frank Darabont had secured the rights to the film adaptation of the novel. He said that he would get to it one day. He planned to make it low budget and stated It will be weird, existential, and very contained. And then up to April of 2018, New Line Cinema was set to adapt a film based on the novel, with James Vanderbilt attached to write and produce the film, along with Bradley Fisher and William Sherrick, through their Mythology Entertainment banner. And that one eventually would fall through as well. They mostly didn't proceed because the story's relentless bleakness scared off studios, so that we just didn't feel like the right time. And then we, 2019, 2018 time period is what we're talking about. So we're seeing that's around the success of it and sort of the King Renaissance, I think, in the adaptations that we started to see. So I think that this started to get some more traction. And then eventually Lionsgate put together this film with Francis Lawrence directing.
That's cool. I feel like we heard about the Darabont adaptation. Maybe we talked about that back when we did Shawshank Redemption.
We may have.
That would have been interesting. He's a great filmmaker. But I'm glad that someone got it and had a vision for it and was able to pull it off. I think they do here.
I think so, yeah. And we've talked a lot about this cast, and I wanted to talk about kind of an interesting coincidence here that Hoffman spoke about. So he's talking about taking on, this is an interview, and he's talking about taking on the part of a young character who lost a father. And Hoffman famously lost his father.
Yeah.
Young, obviously, like he was, he passed much younger than he should have. And Hoffman said, quote, "When your trauma is on display for the world, there's no actually hiding it. I'm like, I might as well talk about it, or I might as well put it into something, because if I keep hiding it and running from it, that's not fair to anyone else who has gone through that. I'm here to display this person and this experience as honestly as I can, and hopefully someone else watches it and goes, he sees me, he understands me, and that's, in my opinion, the only reason to do any sort of art."
I like that.
So yeah,
that adds a little to the performance. I didn't know that, so that's cool.
Yeah. It's powerful too, just seeing what we get into here with Garrity's character. And I think that's a good way to jump right into the plot.
Yeah. So we're going to start getting into spoilers.
Yes, here we go. In an alternate 20th century, the United States has a totalitarian military regime following a devastating war. The regime has established an annual event, the Long Walk, which aims to inspire patriotism and work ethic among the destitute, as the country is in the grips of a severe economic depression. 50 teenage boys, one from each state, are chosen randomly, given water and rations, and must walk hundreds of miles nonstop while escorted by armed soldiers who also broadcast the event. Those who fall below 3 miles per hour or stop walking receive up to 3 warnings before being executed. The walk ends when there is only one survivor remaining, who receives a large cash prize and can have one wish fulfilled. Although the sign-up is technically voluntary, nearly all eligible men do so every year in the hope of improving their families' lives. Raymond Ray Garrity, the year's participant from Maine, is driven to the starting line near the Maine-Canada border by his mother, Ginny, who begs him to back out. Ray refuses and meets the other participants, including Peter Pete McVries, Billy Stebbins, Arthur Art Baker, Collie Parker, Gary Barkovich, Hank Olson, and Richard Harkness. The Major, a mysterious official who oversees the regime's death squads, starts the walk and greets the boys from time to time as they proceed southward. During the first day, Ray gets to know the other walkers and forms a close bond with Pete. A boy named Thomas Curley is the first to be killed after he develops a Charlie horse in his leg. Barkovich is shunned by the group for provoking another walker named Rank into attacking him, resulting in Rank's execution.
All right, let's stop there, talk about this setup. There's some similarities there, but as we already talked about, they reduced the number down to 50, one for each state. Kind of makes sense. You can kind of see this as a reasonable way to set this thing up, I guess, in an unreasonable world. And it also provides the opportunity, I think, to have a little more variety in the sort of accents and backgrounds. You kind of get the idea that each person is from somewhere different. They did keep the same very minimalist approach to the production and TV element. We just at one point hear about, oh, you're on camera, and we see that there's a camera in one of these vehicles. And then that's it. We don't ever see what that looks like on the other end or anything like that. We're stick with the walkers. Yeah. I kind of like that. It felt very faithful to the book in that way, and we didn't change it into being something where we're seeing a lot of the what's being shown to people at home. Which keeps it very grounded. It would be a different way to do it, but I liked this ultimately.
Yeah, and I think there's an instinct or a want to just cut to somebody sitting in their living room watching it and getting a reaction out of that person. But we don't get that. So we don't know if like some people are horrified, some people are loving it. Like we just don't know the greater
We don't
context.
know if it's live or it's going to be shown later. That was unclear in the book too.
Yeah. So it's definitely an interesting way to keep the focus really on what's going on presently in front of us, and we're left. I like that, like there's some ambiguity there that we're left.
Are they
kind
picking
of
up all these conversations, or is it just more of like a wide angle and you don't hear everything everybody's saying? I don't know.
It's definitely cool to try to see like what we think the rest of the world is, what's going on out there, and how people are resisting it in their own ways or just going along with it.
Yeah. So Mark Hamill, as the Major, shows up, and he is the mouthpiece for something we talked a lot about in the last episode, which is this idea of like the toxic masculinity being used to control these boys, and it's like sort of a tool of the state, and that all these guys felt compelled to sign up for it. Everybody does. And this all goes back to the history of this book and how it was written as a reaction to the Vietnam War by Stephen King. And he was noticing that if you didn't support the Vietnam War, you were considered less manly. And I think he kind of used that and wrote that into the book in this way. And I noticed that the Mark Hamill, as the Major, definitely kept that around. There was a lot of commentary about the boys having hanging sacks and stuff like that, big hanging sacks. Yeah. And he definitely was commenting a lot on their manliness, right? Like, you be a man. Oh, look at you be courageous, and talking about their valor and all this stuff. And of course, it's kind of laid bare as like being ridiculous, as we just see how sort of pointless this whole exercise feels, and the deaths feel so meaningless, and yet it's being tied to this idea of heroism. I like that all felt like it was right out of the book. This character feels very similar to me to what we heard about. He's got a little bit of celebrity status. Like, he's called the Major, but like it's unclear just how high up he is in the military, and is he actually a major, or is that just what they call him? He's kind of like the head of this whole thing. It seems like he gets to make some of the rules. Choose how it's enforced. He seems to be kind of like the head honcho who is behind a lot of this. But much like in the book, it's unclear how true that is, and I think they don't even fully know. Also, it seems like the age is slightly older here. A lot of these guys seemed like they were over 18, whereas in the book, they had to be under 18. So in fact, the book is like very directly all children. These are all children, teenagers. And in fact, I think there's an early plot point with Curly, as you talked about, the first one to die. It seems like he is someone who is under 18 and has lied about his age. That was the implication on that.
Which
that we were
did
given.
happen in wars past. As far as the U.S.,
like in wars,
people go in there.
And it lines up actually with the idea of a draft age and stuff too, so it kind of works in that way. Also, just it's easier to work with adult actors who are at least 18, so it makes sense that you would do it for a movie.
Right.
Less rules around it.
Yeah. The Major is interesting because
you can make them walk 15 miles, which you probably can't do with children.
Yeah, right. The Major is an interesting sort of force in this film because we talk about like early on the characters seem like they know who he is, almost kind of revere him in a way, like they like are like he's a badass, he's like a legend that we all know about and we've seen all this before. So they start walking, they get their dog tags from him, and he, like you said, he like early on is anytime anyone shows any defiance or spark in them or whatever, he's like, good, yeah, I'm glad you have that, and he's kind of he's equating that
you're
to
gonna
like
need that, yeah,
manliness or toughness or something like that. We get the progression of that as time goes on through the story, and at some point they start having to face these horrors that the system is pushing on them, like their friends dropping and how and you love to see like the characters early on, like McVries and Garrity, like trying to carry people along, like literally drag them to the finish line if they need to, and like obviously that speaks volumes about them. But as time goes, like they literally can't save anybody, and then ultimately like it is kind of this sadly like fruitless effort because of the system that's set up. And we talked last episode a lot about like what this could also represent. Yeah,
it kind of gets into this whole idea, like it's all a metaphor for life, and especially in a bleak situation like this, in the sense of like you have to face your fate alone. Like you can't die, like you're always gonna die alone, and like everyone kind of has to walk their own path, and yet you can try and help people. Does it mean anything? It's like no, but also yes, and you can make it mean something if you choose to. And these relationships they form in some ways seem ill-advised, like don't make any friends on the long walk is like what one of the characters says. But we see our main two, Garrity and McVrees, doing just that, and that in some ways seems to be their superpower, as I talked about in the book. That's some of the things that keeps them going. And then we have the character of Stebbins, who is sort of aloof and he removed, very athletic, and is sort of following his own path, not interacting a ton with everybody else, kind of sticking to himself and being very, very mysterious, not giving a lot of personal information about himself. And we'll come to find out why that is, but he kind of stands apart. Him and Barkovich, I guess. Barkovich is also, he's the guy we talked about who ends up getting one of the other ones killed through like kind of a bullying moment. Very Stephen King-esque character, just like huge asshole. But then we see him having to like sort of live with the guilt of what he's done and the judgment of his peers, even though he claims he doesn't care. And we kind of see like that's ends up not being the case, and he does end up caring. And I thought that was really engagingly done. I like that made it right out of the book. And another small detail I'll give him a shout out for was when Garrity arrives and he hands the guard his ID, the guard just keeps it and doesn't give it back. And that was right out of the book of like, well, that was weird. He didn't give it back, and he was like, yeah, I guess not. And I like that it made it into the movie. It adds even more importance to the moment too. Like I guess the idea of like the government takes and doesn't return, right? Like doesn't have any interest in giving you anything back. It's just like, this is mine now. I own you.
Yeah. I have kind of a take with this film. We're talking about like kind of the heart and like, or like what was being deployed here as far as this story. And I want to talk about something we talked about in the book episode. And it was this idea of like Richard Bachman as a mode of storytelling versus Stephen King as a mode of storytelling. And we talked about how like Stephen King says that Richard Bachman was him kind of writing from his outlook on the world, was kind of him writing on a rainy day. And so this idea of like more bleakness, more like that optimistic like tilt to it. And I felt like this film, in the way that it like explores almost like a test of the soul. It's like the government is employing this horrific thing, but what we're seeing throughout, or what I'm seeing as like the moral center of it, is like the best people are being tested and they're bonding with others and they're choosing to sacrifice. And we see even all the way close to the end.
Choosing to fight back.
Choosing to fight back.
Even when they can't really earn anything by doing it. They're still showing opposition, and we're cheering them on. Like we want them to, right?
Right. And you get near the end and you start seeing like the selflessness of these characters, right? And how like they come to love one another to the point that they're willing to sacrifice and give up their long walk for each other. Yeah. And I think that is like with some stuff that happens near the end, which we can just say like there are significant changes to the ending, and we'll be there soon. But I think with some of those changes, you're seeing like this to me feels like, if the Long Walk book is a Richard Bachman mode of storytelling, I feel like the filmmakers here almost sort of deployed Stephen King as a mode of storytelling.
I mean, he's more prominently displayed right on the intro and at the outro. Like it's like this is a Stephen King story now instead of a Bachman story.
Right, and I mean to say that like in shift of tone or in shift of like bleakness and shift of, while it is so bleak, there is still that hopeful thread that feels like in keeping with a Stephen King story. And I thought it was I just think I would applaud them for staying true to Stephen King and that original source material, Bachman specifically, and then somehow finding a way to change it and turn it into something that I recognize as like almost more of a Stephen King story.
Well, and we talked about how this is a movie that's coming out in 2025, right? And it was written in like the 60s from what we saw. So it's much later. It's talking about a different time period, different political situation in this country. And would there be an appetite for something as bleak as that story right now? I don't know. I think it was smart to change it a little bit. We'll push it. We'll return to this here at the end, but like pushing it in a direction where things have a little bit more sense of justice to them.
Right.
So
yeah, with the major, I would just say like we talked about how like at first they like kind of like him or seem to revere him in some way. We get to the point, like I would say midway to 3/4 of the way through the film, where they're literally being like, fuck the long walk, fuck the major, and they're all coming together,
they're all
saying
turned
this,
on him.
and I think that progression all the way through, and then knowing, obviously, just like in that meta way, knowing that like the actors like are progressing chronologically, and we're seeing it unfold in that way. It's a really smart and like intentional way to tell the story. So props to them for that.
Yeah, I like that.
All right, so as the walk continues, Pete says he wants to use his wish to improve the world. Ray wants to wish for a rifle to kill the major as revenge for his father's execution over political opposition. Pete tries to talk Ray out of it, admits that he cannot let someone die to win, and intends to sit down once he has had enough. More walkers die as the days pass, including Harkness. Hank becomes delirious and tries to attack the soldiers, but they shoot him and let him bleed to death. After learning he was married, the boys vow to send money to his widow. Guilt over Rank's death and his exclusion from the pact leads Barkovich to beg to join. Soon after Ray agrees, Barkovich has a mental breakdown and fatally stabs himself in the throat with a spoon. Only Ray, Pete, Stebbins, Art, and Collie remain. While walking through his hometown of Freeport, Ray spots Ginny and runs to her, apologizing for competing. Ginny's his mother. He's almost killed for stepping off the road, but is saved by Pete. Collie, driven to insanity, steals a rifle and shoots a soldier, then kills himself after being wounded by the others. Art develops an internal hemorrhage and thanks Pete and Ray for being his friends before stopping. Stebbins, who has fallen ill, reveals to Ray and Pete that he is one of the Major's many illegitimate sons, and he intended to use his wish to be accepted as his son. He tells the pair it was an honor to walk with them before stopping, leaving Ray and Pete as the final two walkers. After 5 days and well over 300 miles of walking, the pair arrives at a large city where a big crowd is gathered to see who will win. Pete sits down only for Ray to pick him up and encourage him to keep going. He does so only for Ray to stop walking instead. The Major personally executes Ray and congratulates Pete as the winner. When asked to state his wish, Pete carries out Ray's plan by asking for a rifle and killing the Major with it. He then turns to the now empty street and continues walking.
All right, so that's a big change, but let's back up a little bit and work our way there. Talk about some of these other characters' fates. So Arthur, who I thought was an awesome character, who ends up being really kind of a fan favorite. He ends up having the hemorrhage, the nosebleed, and ends up having to lose. He's almost died a couple times, and they've kind of helped save him. So that was a very sad death. Talk about like some of the really sad ones.
There were a couple of really sad ones, and like you said, Arthur and Art has shown his colors up to that point, because when Hank was originally shot, and he's kind of bleeding out, he's like saying, I did it the wrong way, and it's so tragic the way like seeing him go out that way. And Art like runs back for him and is like laying down there with him and like holding him and stuff, and then eventually like is convinced to get up and continue on.
That was from the book too, the whole like they gut shot him to like prove a point, to like discourage you from doing that, from like rushing the soldiers. That was right out of the book. It's actually even bloodier and kind of darker in the book, but it's on par here. There's another character, Richard Harkness, who was the writer. That's right out of the book, but he's the one who like twists his ankle at one point. He's just walking on it. That was fucking gross.
That was, it was a rough way to go, because you're not gonna make it, and he's doing everything. I mean, what was wild is just like how long he had been going on.
He walked for a while on that thing,
and how brutal they made that look.
Collie Parker was an interesting character. I felt like he was kind of I can't remember him being quite this in the book. Like this didn't stand out to me in the way that this one does. He was an interesting one. He ends up going out. He kind of goes out in a blaze of glory, right? Like he tries to rush the soldiers, I think.
Well, and I definitely think there was a commentary being made there about like native
him being
people,
Native American,
people being native versus like the system, the military, American government, all that kind of stuff, and the way that he fought back against that, and then ultimately like had like a final stand in that way of defiance, and like wasn't killed. I think he kills himself instead of allowing them to have the satisfaction or something. I think there's definitely commentary there, and I felt it was really
shot
powerful.
Himself or something, right? Yeah,
thought it was powerful stuff.
Yeah, and then we got Gary Barkovich, who we talked about. He kind of has this moment where he desperately wants to be accepted, and it's only Garrity who sort of is willing to extend that olive branch to him. And then as soon as he does, it's like unclear what causes it, right? Like, because in some ways, maybe it's the release of finally being accepted, but also he can kind of tell that the rest of them aren't really gonna. He's like, tell them for me, tell them this and tell them that, and he's like, they can all hear him, so it's like weird, and he seems to kind of be losing it. And then he ends up killing himself. He like, stabs himself in the throat. And a dark way to go out here. And we get down to our last three eventually. And this is where the biggest changes start occurring.
Yeah, one thing I'll say about Art before we get to the final three is just the way that it was so tragic, his death too, the way that he was like, don't look back. And that was the kind of the moment I think you were
that might have been that moment I talked about early on, right? Where it's blurry and we see it happen, but he says, don't look when it happens.
Yeah. And it just was one of those things where we talked about it last episode of like, you could be the most physically fit person and you could deserve it in all those different ways, and like anything can happen. He has some sort of hemorrhage or something, and like, he can't make it, and it feels unfair. And it's of course I think a commentary there on war or life or something.
Yeah, definitely. So we get these final three, much like in the book, it's these same three, McVries, Garrity, and Stebbins, but the order and the fate of all three has changed.
Yes.
So Stebbins in the movie has an illness. That doesn't happen in the book. The illness is a different character. But Stebbins is the one who's given this illness where he's feeling like he's got some sort of cold or something that's affecting him, and he's like, I never get sick, but I happen to get sick this one time. So you talk about that randomness again. But the reveal does come out that he is the Major's son. That is from the book as well. And he has this, in the book, he has this thing where he talks about how he's the carrot, he's the rabbit, he's what they're all chasing. And in the book, it's talked about how, like, this is the farthest any walk has ever gone. And he kind of served his purpose in that way. It's kind of unclear whether or not the Major even knows that he is his son. Whereas I think we got the clear indication, to me at least, that he did know.
Yeah.
Because he specifically said, like, good luck, son, or something like that to him, like, at the very beginning. And I kind of made note of that. So does seem that the Major knows.
Or at least has an inkling, like he at least has an idea that it could be.
Yeah, and maybe, although I don't know, maybe it was implied he did know, because it was the whole thing of like, I'm the carrot, I'm the rabbit. So like maybe the Major did know because he wanted that. He wanted him to take him even farther. But yeah, and then McVries and Garrity in the book, I guess spoilers for the book, but we got to talk about how it's different. In the book, Garrity tries to save McVries. Much like in the movie, but then McVries kind of refuses and says, like, you've saved me, thanks, but I am sitting down. And he does sit down and die. And then it's Stebbins and Garrity who are the last two, and Garrity has decided, I'm not going to win. I'm going to
go tell Stebbins I'm going to
die. And but then he decides, I need to tell Stebbins personally. So he's like, I got to catch up to him because he's got a little bit ahead. So he catches up to him and, like, grabs him on the shoulder or whatever and turns him around to, like, tell him you've won. And when he does that, Stebbins just dies, like, right on the spot. And it gets really surreal at this moment. They're described as the Walking Dead. They're at the end of their lines. He's Garrity's has no shoes at this point. They're almost kind of falling apart. It felt like, at least emotionally, physically, they're malnourished and sickly, and just it was a really kind of dark and twisted kind of moment at the end here. And I really liked the way that played out in the book, but it left you with a very different feeling. And Garrity at the end sees a figure. So after Stebbins dies, he's now alone, and they're trying to tell him you won, but he sees this, like, figure, and he thinks someone else is still ahead of him, and he's got to catch up to this person. And so he keeps walking, and in fact, he even starts to run, and that's how the book ends. And it's, like, unclear if that's even really happening, or if this is just something Garrity thinks is happening. I don't know. So it's kind of a weird but very kind of almost pessimistic ending, right? Like, in like a very, very bleak. And then do you want to talk about, like, the changes and how this actually plays out in the movie?
Well, a couple of things I'll say too is, like, I felt like in the book, like, that it was the touch between Garrity and Stebbins that was, like, some sort of, like, catalyst for, like, he's, like, longed for, like, companionship from his father or whatever, and I think, like, the touch, of course, like, I'm reading into this in a sense, but yes, I think that was a part of it, is like of course, like, coincidentally he could have just died then, but I also feel like that was like an acceptance of all of that thing, and he was finally, because it was like a respect thing, or like equal. They were seen as equals, and he really did accomplish it, so he had nothing else to live for, something like that. But then
or
we get into
so fragile that someone like grabbing you by the shoulder was a shock to the system enough to kill you.
Yeah, for sure. And then we get into the McVrees stuff and how it's different here, and like
so McVrees and Garrity, actually Stubbins dies before them, and it's McVrees and Garrity who are the last two, so changing who the last two.
With the other one we talked about, like the shadowy figure could be like him running to his death and still dying, or like this pursuit of like a never-ending race, like even though he's run the race, like it's never going to end, the system's going to continue, someone else is going to be running, like that's something that they can never outrun or whatever. I think that was the interpretation there, and then we have to change it completely because of the changes here. So we talked about it in the summary there, but basically McVrees stops, says I'm done, and this is when Garrity is kind of paying back all those moments and saying like no, you have to continue on. And this is a good time to talk about like their relationship too, because there is the implication of like love, brotherly love, familial love, romantic love, like
potentially romantic love is hinted at, especially from McVrees, I would say.
And that's something that we could kind of draw in the book as well, that with like some of their interactions and the way that McVrees is talking throughout. So again, you can read into those things as how you'd like to, because I think there is that ambiguity, but Garrity picks him up and he's paying it back, and that's when he decides to be the one to stop, and McVrees has to keep moving, and he's like, no, don't do this. Ultimately Garrity stays behind, and that's a big twist obviously for book readers, and I think that's something that book readers wouldn't see coming. But I do think this is such a interesting and I think clever update to this story. Not just because people are expecting Garrity to win, but because the sort of emotional through line that we've talked about with McVrees and the way that he's shown himself to be the best of them, and the most willing to go out of his way to help everyone else. Garrity wouldn't have made it to that point without him.
For sure.
And I think there's like some really powerful correlations or parallels with like what's going on in our country, and just like the way that the systems are treating different types of people. And we get to this point where Garrity's wish was to do the selfish thing and kill the Major and continue the cycle of violence. And McVrees was like, I don't want that. That's not what I want to do. We need to stop this. But I
don't want that for you.
Right. And what ultimately happens is we see Garrity stop, Garrity get killed, and McVrees fall into the cycle of violence and still go through with Garrity's wishes. And he kills the Major, continues that cycle of violence, and then runs off. And I think a way that could be read similarly, like what is he running to? He wasn't gunned down immediately after shooting the Major, but you have to think that he would be hunted down more than likely. There's like again, still sort of like an ambiguous ending there, bittersweet, but at least in this version, the update is the system can be toppled or at least there is a revolution that could be triggered by the acts of a few, that sort of thing.
Maybe.
Yeah,
we don't know.
That's kind of what you can draw from it.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the changes that set this ending up. So one of the big changes is that Garrity, his father, was personally executed by the Major. That's different than the book. In the book, it's like it gets taken away by these squads, never to be seen again, probably dead. In the movie, there's a scene where the Major himself comes to their house with some soldiers, pulls his father out into the street, and executes him in front of him.
For specifically defiance to not basically kneel to the powers that be.
He gives him like a chance. He's like, just renounce everything you've said or whatever, and he refuses to do that. So he also like kind of gives an example of defiance, even in the face of death, for Garrity to follow. And
tells him not to forget who he is.
Yeah, don't forget who you are. Yeah, and so it gives Garrity an example to follow, and then we see Garrity say like, "This is what I want to do. I want to come face to face with the Major, and I have this plan. I'm going to ask for a carbine." Tells that to McVrees, who says, "I don't want that for you. You have to promise not to do that." And then so that's the sort of the background as we arrive at this moment. Garrity dies, which, by the way, it felt like, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but it felt like he wasn't even. Maybe he was out of warnings at that point, but it felt like they just immediately shot him as soon as he stopped. And maybe it was because he was out of warnings. Maybe that would I guess explain it. But killed by the Major himself, and McVrees is now the last one. And McVrees ends up following exactly what he said he didn't want for Garrity. Now, you can interpret this a couple ways. You said falls back into the cycle of violence. Certainly, you can interpret it that way. I think you can also look at it as like it's selfish maybe to want the vengeance for yourself, right? Like, I want vengeance for my father, and I'm taking it. That feels in a way kind of selfish, right? But McVrees is like, now I'm going to take the vengeance that my friend wanted and enact it for him in kind of a selfless way, right? Like, I'm going to almost sacrifice my future just to give him the vengeance that he wasn't able to get, and like a kind of a return to like he's giving back to him for the fact that he allowed him to win. So there's an interesting distinction there where it just sort of changes the calculus a little bit, and like, I don't know, that feels a little better to me. Maybe it feels a little more like a communal thing or something, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a decision that's made by the most selfless character in the story throughout, and ultimately makes a decision. And again, I think it has to do with, you build these relationships and they do mean something. And the ideology, he's picking up the ideology from Garrity's father, ultimately. And I think
that's true. Yeah, it has almost spread to him, right? Like, he has learned this lesson, and he has followed the example that he saw from Garrity and from Garrity, by extension, Garrity's father. I like that. Like, so it's kind of like passed all the way along to him now. He's been living it, but now he truly embodies it at the end, and he shoots the major. And then, he turns and he goes into he walks, and like, that is, I think, an interpretive moment, because there's nobody on the street when he turns to walk. So it's kind of surreal, because he had been surrounded by a bunch of people. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of weird when he turns and there's nobody there. And he continues walking, and he's just kind of like going into these like street lights, and it's raining, but it kind of pans up to the sky, I think. And to me, it felt like kind of a release, or like moving on to something better. It felt kind of positive to me, and I can't really put my finger on it. I have to like really look back at it. But it was kind of shot in slow motion. The rain's on his face, and he looks like he's like accomplished something. This is very different than the book, where the book is very much like, it robs us of the sense of anyone winning. Right. There's the major doesn't come to the character at the end and say, "What's your wish?" That doesn't happen. The implication is that at some point down the line, they'll get a wish. They don't give it to him like right at the moment that they've won. And in fact, I think they're trying to tell him to win, and he doesn't even hear them. He just keeps walking, right? Because he thinks he hasn't won yet. And so we're literally denied any sort of finality and any sort of winning or victory moment. Whereas here we get the downfall of the major, the mouthpiece of this, the face of this is killed, and we get a sense of like, fuck yeah. And that just really changes the message and overall feeling of the end of this book to one of defiance, a little bit more hopeful, and a little bit more, I don't know, like just in a sense. Yeah. And so I think for me, coming down to it, is just going to be like, how do we feel about that? Because I think both are very valid stories to tell. And the idea of stuff being meaningless and bleak that's a valid way to tell a story too. And in fact, I really liked it in the book. It felt right for the story that had been told. They laid the seeds for this. They earned this ending, I think. And we shifted, and I think in 2025, in the moment we're in, this does feel like more socially sort of powerful and important to tell this kind of story. So I imagine that might be why they changed it that way.
I think so, and I have some information about this.
Okay.
Ultimately, like we're going to get to which we prefer, and I think the ending is going to maybe the overall morality of the story is here baked into the ending, and we can kind of talk about which we prefer. But director Francis Lawrence explained why screenwriter J.T. Molnar made changes to the ending and why Stephen King ultimately signed off on them. So they were worried. They were like, "Oh shit." People were telling them not to change the ending, specifically Molnar, and he was like, "Just send it to King, see what he thinks. If he gives his blessing, then, that's great. If he doesn't, then we'll change it." And they sent it off to him. They said, quote, "This idea that McVrees was going to sacrifice himself because he loves Garrity so much, and that Garrity ends up sacrificing himself because he believes McVrees is the one that's worthy of winning, that kind of shared experience, I thought, was really emotional," Lawrence said. He added, "You don't really want the guy who's in it for vengeance to win, right? Because that's really not what the story's about. And I knew that people were going to love McVrees. What I also loved about it was just narratively, the idea that we can open on a kid in a car and the audience is going to be programmed to believe, clearly, he's our winner. I love turning that on its head and going, guess what? He's not the winner. Lawrence was reportedly nervous to see if King would sign off on the changes, but the author, who was an executive producer on the project, did. He really liked the ending, I think, because we stayed true to its spirit. I think he was willing to go for it.
So he didn't come up with it, but he signed off on it.
Correct, yeah. Okay. And I think for what everything that we're saying, like this is the kind of and this is the kind of story that maybe people need right now. You know, this is the kind of thing that shows what is important, even under the thumb of, you know, oppressive government or oppressive situations like this. Like what community can do together, and how
acts of defiance having value. Yeah.
Right. And how like true freedom is you know, something that people have sacrificed a lot for and will continue to. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's very powerful. I think it's interesting to think of Stephen King getting to see an ending, because, you know, famously people like to say he doesn't understand endings, or he doesn't know how to do an ending. And I'm sure that he's very wary of some screenwriters coming in and saying, yeah, we're gonna change your ending. But for him to be game, I think that he understood. And I do think truly it does feel to me like it was a shift from a Richard Bachman story to a Stephen King story.
Yeah, it really lines up better that way, yeah.
And that's like at the core of kind of how I feel about it at this point.
Yeah, I agree with all that, man. So one thing we didn't talk about as much, because it's not as present in the movie, is there was this whole sexual undertones. We talked about maybe the implication of a relationship, but there was a lot of horniness from these guys. Garrity had a girlfriend that he talked about a ton and that he saw at one point. It was a little bit Oedipal at times. He had this relationship where, like, at first he like seemed to be doing it for her, but then at the end it seemed like he had turned on her and felt like she was just like another sort of lever of control being used against him. He went through a whole journey with that. And that was definitely downplayed. I think we still get one sequence where they talk about being horny. So there's kind of like a nod to it almost, but it didn't feel as present here. And ultimately I think that's because we've shifted the messaging of the movie to be a little bit more about this idea of like rebelling against authoritarian rule and less about the dark ways in which our men's sexuality, and, you know, the concept of manliness and how that's all tied together is used against them and used to control them. That's still here, but that's like less of the point of the story. And so I just wanted to lay that out there as like another potential, because you shift the message in this way, you get less of that.
Yeah.
And so whether or not, like, how we feel about that, I guess, can play into this decision here at the end.
I thought that it was quite a Stephen King thing to have in his story, and I understood. I think we even said in the book episode that I assumed that they would kind of lean out of some of this, and they left more of it than I actually thought they would. Even some of the comments that they were making about like some girl with a sign on the side of the road and some of that, but it didn't go as explicit and and it wasn't as like pervasive as it was in the story. Like, it was all they were thinking about. Like you said, it was that lever that it was clear could motivate young men, obviously.
What did you think of the way this movie looked at the end? Because that was one thing I found different. I thought they both looked very tired. I didn't feel like they had risen to the level of The Walking Dead, as they're sort of described in the book. Like, I was picturing something truly kind of horrific by the end. And this didn't quite rise to that level. We have a little bit of things being a bit surreal when he turns and runs into the rain, but it didn't feel like we were walking through a nightmare, like it kind of feels like in the book.
Yeah, I think
so it's a little bit like kind of a stylistic shift here at the end. What did you think of that?
I mean, I would have liked, I think in general, a little more surreal stuff in this film. I think like the waking nightmares and the sort of exhaustion and the hallucinations and that sort of thing was something that I was expecting, and ultimately we got like some form of dreams and hallucinations of like flashbacks. But I was definitely expecting some more of the of that, and then getting into the end, I would have liked to see them like really torn up more, like you said. Like he was barefoot at the end and stuff. Like we saw like the kid that was like on his ankle, that was like just like bloody feet, and I assumed that they were like really,
show us a
really
shot of the feet and how they're looking at that point, because like they had to be in fucking hamburger at that point, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I can kind of get what you're saying. I was expecting them to look like death, and they looked like kind of, you know, like they were tired, as they had been through a lot of it. One more thing that I do want to note too, the reference that I mentioned earlier. So parked on the side of a rural road is a red car, inexplicably engulfed in flames. Some say this is a reference to Stephen King's 1983 novel Christine.
Okay.
And its film counterpart, Christine, from 1983.
Yeah, we haven't covered that one yet, so maybe that's why I missed that one.
Yeah, and no one comments on the film, on the fire on this car. So it's just a burning car on the side of the road. I'm like, it has to be a reference to that. Like, once I saw that, I was like, yeah, it must be.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
But
cool.
Yeah, larger Stephen King kind of adaptation stuff. It's cool. This is slots in an interesting space in his adaptations. Really, like, we've said it a bunch of times, but like simplified, stripped down, biting. Like, I think this is a really solid, I think it slots in, you know, in the middle to upper echelon of Stephen King adaptations for me.
Agreed. Yeah. I kind of want to see it again, man. To really kind of figure out how I feel about it as far as like the pantheon. But I really enjoyed this movie. If you're ready, I think let's go ahead and cast our votes.
Yeah, let's do it. All
right. So as I indicated early in this episode, it's very close for me, because I think the impulse is to lean towards this like slightly more hopeful version and say, this is what we need right now. This feels perfect for the moment, and this sort of more just ending. It leaves me with a more positive feeling, and so I think there's an impulse to say more positive feeling equals better. But I really liked the bleak, almost like hopeless feeling of the book. That's not going to be for everyone, but I tend to be a reader who can enjoy that. And I think this is a situation where the book had a really good ending for the story that King wrote as Bachman. And I really liked that ending. I'm quite fond of it. But I found that even though I could kind of see what they were doing and how they set up the Major to be this figure to take the fall, and to sort of maybe encourage people to fight back against authoritarian rule. I think it comes down to what we just talked about with McFreeze and Garrity and their relationship, and the selfless act of McFreeze taking on someone else's vengeance and being able to sacrifice the sort of gain and prosperity, it seems, that is owed to McFreeze in order to take vengeance on behalf of Garrity. That is complex and interesting, and also it's kind of obscure because we don't know for a fact what happens at the end, and is he allowed to get away with this? It's kind of unclear. It seems like maybe to where I think I'm going to give it to the movie, but damn if it isn't close. And I'm very torn because I am quite fond of the way that book ended, and as I said, it was a very good King novel. It's the best Bachman novel I've read, but I think even among King books, it would be quite high for me. I really enjoyed that one.
Agreed. I thought you were gonna go book here, and
I truly was on the fence, and part of me wants to give it to the book just to kind of do that, you know. But ultimately, I think my gut says movie here. Yeah, I like a lot of what you said. And for the sake of time, I'm just gonna say that I agree with a lot of that. I think that the book, I like the bleak nature. I like that it's a raw, like rough early King novel, like really like the first thing I think he wrote. Young King wrote this. Yeah. And I appreciate that, and I see it for what it is, and I think it's really cool that like it is so powerful of like a first story to write, and like so well defined. And I talked about that a lot in the book. It's like it's a really confident book to write as like an early on story. And I know that he adjusted it as around the time that he was publishing it as Bachman. But this film, the updates made, the way that the commentary is shifted, the way that one thing that we didn't note is like this, like a lot of these characters have had their races switched, and I think that that's doing a lot to kind of have a multicultural look at this defiance of this regime, and also the camaraderie that develops between them. Yeah, right. And like I think a lot of that's really powerful. I think today's day and age, this idea of resisting and the way that they come together, and really like, oh my god, these performances and the way that like I really felt
strongly about each of these characters and like the tragedy of each of them as they go and the sacrifices and what like ultimately like all of these people, like all of these young men die to serve to get McVrees to the point that he does what he does at the end. And then him doing that
it all
as
has
an
a
act of
point
defiance. I know that it's like maybe seen as more of a hopeful ending, but I also think that it's got enough ambiguity that like he could have died and this is his interpretation of him moving on or whatever. Or maybe
he
does
gets
run
shot
away.
at the end. And that's like his soul or something.
Yeah. And I think that there's plenty of that could be happening there. But I thought that the shock, and maybe it has to do with the fact that like it's that we're locked in our current moment, and this is just really speaking to that. But I thought that it fit it in a lot of different ways, and it made for a really powerful film that I was expecting to be good, but it was better than that. I would say that this is a pretty great film. I'm taking the film here.
Favorite Francis Lawrence movie? My new favorite movie of his that I've seen, and yeah, I think this is a good one. I think that that's appropriate. We're giving it to the movie here. Thank you all for coming on this long walk with us, for joining us. If you enjoyed our coverage of the Bachman novel and this film, let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on. If you're on YouTube, make sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and leave us a comment. Let us know whether or not you like the ending we described in the book and the more bleak sort of outlook. Does that sound like a story that appeals to you more? Maybe you're a book reader. Or did you like the film's version better? I'm really curious to hear on this one, like where people land, because like I said, I was very much on the fence about it.
And be sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, all of those at Ink to Film, and we're really on every social media platform, so look for us.
Oh yeah, make sure to congratulate James in the comments too on his on his nuptials. I'm sure that would not only would he appreciate that, but it also helps the episode get some traction. So be a good way to do it. We'd also like to let you know about our Patreon. It's patreon.com/inktofilm, and on there we put out bonus episodes monthly, and you can get access to those for as little as $2, as well as the ability to vote on upcoming polls or upcoming projects. All sorts of fun stuff over there, so we'd love to have your support.
And thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, that's it, man. It's going to be a long period of not recording Ink to Film projects coming up here, which is very strange. I'm curious to see how rusty I'll be when we come back. But there is some very exciting stuff on the horizon. We can't announce it just yet because we're still sort of working some things out with a potential guest. We'll see if we can make it happen, and we'll announce it as soon as we can. Yeah. But potentially some very exciting stuff. So hopefully you stick with us. Apologies for the disruption in the schedule, but we appreciate your understanding.
Yeah, and during this year of Richard Bachman, there is also The Running Man releasing. So
that's true.
There's a possibility that we cover that at some point in the late year here, early next year, return to King/Bachman. So pretty interesting. Like we've done The Monkey this year, now The Long Walk. We may do Running Man, but I know we'd like to do it this year or next, one way or the other.
Yeah, it'll be coming at some point here, I think. I think that's high on the list. Edgar Wright is somebody that I know you love, and I do as well, so I'd love to talk about him. But that's going to be it. So until next time.
Keep adapting.